are ready to go. Can everybody hear me? Am I on? All right, I'm calling the meeting to order. And the first order of business will be for Secretary Radu to please call the roll.
Here.
Regent Bradley?
Here.
Regent Green? Here.
Here.
Regent Evers?
Here.
Regent Salvo?
Here.
Regent Higgins?
Here.
Regent Leahy?
Here.
Regent Pointer? Regent Pruitt?
Here.
Regent Roberts?
Here.
Regent Sherman?
Here.
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 Regent Fletcher?
Here.
Regent Tyler?
Here.
Regent Bonstead?
Here.
Regent Walsh?
Here.
Regent Whitmer?
Here.
Quorum is present.
Used to be last.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody.
Turn it around.
Morning. Good morning. Seems like a long time since we've met, but back at it again. I do want to point out one thing that I only became aware of when I entered the room, but I want to show you that Regent Pruitt's picture is now up on the wall. Congratulations to him.
The three old guys all in a row. It's you, David. He moves up.
Before we start, my understanding is that Kevin has an introduction for us.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everybody. Good to see you. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce to the board a new face in a new role. Joining us this morning is Dr. Betsy Morgan, who is the interim provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs at UW-La Crosse. And where are you? David, welcome. Dr. Morgan agreed to step into the position at Chancellor Gow's request after Provost Kathleen N. Finken of UW-La Crosse accepted a position at Cal Poly University. Dr. Morgan has 3 years of experience in the Provost's office, having served as a faculty assistant to the Provost in 2005 to 2008. She also has more than 7 years of experience as chair of UWL's psychology department. So we look forward to working with Betsy in the months ahead. Back to you, President Speck.
Thank you very much. We have some weighty topics on the agenda for this meeting, and as always, that's a good thing. Higher education here in Wisconsin is facing some significant challenges, just as it is elsewhere, and it is important and appropriate that this board be directly involved, especially in its policy aspects. Various topics before us today and tomorrow are in the forefront of issues on the national stage as well. Others, like how to maximize the, quote, value added, close quote, by this board, are more local. In all cases, they are worthy of our best interactive, engaged efforts to make decisions that will stand the test of time. I suggest that our discussions require us to be sensitive to certain concerns intertwined with the Wisconsin higher education disputes that occurred during the first half of 2011. More specifically, we should keep in mind that the unsuccessful attempt to separate UW-Madison from the UW system reflected to a limited extent the concern of some at our flagship with alleged system and regent constraints on local action, especially at a time of a percentage decline in state support. Portions of the 2011-13 budget bill, Act 10, responded to that concern by granting various cautious first-step flexibilities to the system and its institutions. Equally important, Act 10 raised the possibility of more to come, in part through the creation of the Task Force on UW Restructuring and Operational Flexibilities, chaired by our colleague Mike Falvo. Likewise, President Riley also responded to the concerns by requesting his advisory committee on the roles of UW system administration to make recommendations for major changes in the delegation of system powers to chancellors and their institutions. It did so, and those recommendations have begun to be implemented. Now it is time to consider additional ideas for decentralization. In our continuing in-depth look at what we do in the UW system and how we do it, we are seeking the right balance of transformative change that adapts to the realities of life in Wisconsin in 2012 and preservation of the best of the status quo. We are lucky to be Regent policymakers at this crucial time in the history of Wisconsin higher education. Our challenge, working with the governor, the legislature, Regent Falvo's task force, our chancellors, and our shared governance partners, is how to maintain at this difficult time the scope and quality of public higher education at the heart of our state's culture. We start this morning with a presentation on strategies for cost containment and improved educational attainment, led by Interim Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Mark Nook. I've been assured by Mark that the presentation will inform us about what we're currently doing to hold down costs and increase efficiencies, and how such efforts are also an investment in the future as well. To provide us with more context for our discussion, I turn it back to Kevin.
Thank you, President Spector. Well, I think everybody's pretty aware that the topic of the cost of obtaining a college education is very much in the public sphere these days. It's a hot topic, from the Occupy protests around the country to the President's State of the Union speech, to the front pages of our local newspapers, and the same on our media sites. At the core of this debate, I think, are some really complex questions that don't have clear, simple answers. Among them, how do we, as a nation, as a state, meet the growing national demand for more well-educated graduates, even as the resources to produce those graduates continue to diminish? As reflected on our agenda, today's presentation is intended to keep these issues interconnected as we discuss both cost containment and educational attainment, two economic and social imperatives for our colleges and universities, but also for our country. This issue has been on the UW system's radar for years. Under the leadership of this board, we've sustained in recent years relatively modest tuition rates while earning a reputation as one of the nation's most respected and efficient systems of higher education. That said, our efforts heretofore are insufficient as we face a veritable Bermuda Triangle of challenges. Operational costs continue to rise, as do demands for the UW system to make clear contributions to economic development. State and federal tax revenues continue to be constrained, leading to leaner funding for both university budgets and for student financial aid. In turn, this contributes to higher tuition bills and longer waiting lists for grants and scholarships. Finally, the depressed economy has left our families in Wisconsin with lower incomes, depleted savings, and justifiable fears about the future. Today's presentation and discussion are designed to highlight just one facet of that challenge, how the UW system is containing costs for both students and taxpayers while also improving educational attainment. To lead us in that discussion, I'll turn the program over now to my colleague, Interim Senior Vice President Mark Nook. Mark.
Thank you, Kevin and Regent Spector. What we're going to do today is take a very high-level look at the funding that the University of Wisconsin receives. In particular, what we're going to focus on is to what level, what I'll focus on is to what level we've been good stewards of those dollars and how we have controlled costs. At this time, I'm going to ask three chancellors to join us up here at the front table. They're going to be our panel of experts who later in the program will be able to answer some questions and give you some ideas of things that are going on the local campuses. In your packet, you'll find a copy of our slides that we'll be going through this morning. You also have in your packet a document entitled Cost Containment Strategies at UW System Institutions. This document was put together with the help of all of our chancellors and their colleagues on their campuses to identify the strategies that they're doing to control their operating costs, but also to control their direct costs to students. And these have been put together in sort of a synoptic way for you, but each of the chancellors is willing to answer questions about the items that are on here when we get to the question and answer period. To start off, as Kevin pointed out, there is a national discussion going on about what has been called the cost of attending college. Those cost discussions have too much focus just on the tuition and the change in tuition, and there are many other parameters that go into determining what the price that a student pays really is. Our funding from the state appropriation, in particular within public institutions, financial aid dollars that are available, and then other resources available to the students as well. And we'll be looking at a few of those this morning. The State of the Union address really highlighted this issue, followed up especially by the President's presentation at the University of Michigan on how to flesh out some of the ideas for moving forward on controlling costs and making more funds available for financial aid for our students to help mitigate the cost of as tuition has risen and will continue to rise. So this morning, the first thing we're going to do is take a very macroscopic look at the 30-year history of funding to the University of Wisconsin. That funding comes in two forms. One is the state appropriation, and the other is tuition dollars. We're going to focus just on those revenues coming in. We're not going to look at the auxiliary side of the house, what happens with room and board, what happens with the other operations within the university. We're going to focus on core mission of the university, the funding for the academic endeavor within the University of Wisconsin. Mostly we're choosing to do that because the debate has been about what's happening with tuition. And we want to make sure that you understand the impacts on tuition here within the state of Wisconsin. And it will be an extremely high-level look at these funding and how we use those monies. We'll also look at just very, very briefly at some simple, again, very macroscopic measures of educational attainment, how we have continued to improve what we do with the money that we have. And next we'll have a panel that will talk to you. Chancellor Renee Wachter from Superior, Chancellor Chuck Sorensen from UW Stout, and Chancellor Michael Lovell from the UW Milwaukee will each present a little bit about what they're doing on their campuses. The intent here is that the document handed out called Cost Containment Strategies really provides for you sort of a breadth of what's happening within the UW system. These three chancellors will have an opportunity then to look at a few of the examples that they're doing on their campus to provide some depth to that discussion and help you understand the level of things going on a few individual campuses. And then we'll open it up for some questions so that everyone can be involved. So at this time, I think I'd like to invite the panel to come up. We've got spots for you right here. So Chuck and Renee and Mike. To start this discussion then, let's talk a little bit about the funding that the University of Wisconsin receives. And what we've assembled here is the total funding for the educational enterprise within the University of Wisconsin system. There are two sources of funding. Those include the state appropriation and our tuition dollars that are received from students. When we say tuition dollars, some of those dollars are actually paid through federal financial aid and state financial aid, but these are the dollars that come in. They come in looking like tuition, and then there's the state appropriation. So it's the total funding we have to run the educational enterprise within the University of Wisconsin system. We've taken a look at a 30-year history, a little over a 30-year history. Why was 1980 chosen as our starting point? There's actually two or three reasons. The first was Stephen Collison, a colleague of mine, was putting together a report on the activity within our academic program and how those have changed, and he had gone back to 1980, so I chose to start at the same place. Additionally, this is sort of just after the system came into being. It kind of settled down into form. And third, this is a reasonably long period of time that we don't start to talk about any one political agenda or political party being involved in running these things. It's a really long, broad look. And finally, 1980 is the year I graduated from college. So, yeah, maybe that's the real point. The second line on here, the red line that has just appeared, is the inflation rate as measured by the Consumer Price Index. This is something that I hadn't seen pulled together, especially for our system, but in general, even in some of the work done by the Delta Cost Project, which I'll talk about a little bit. What this shows is that over the 30-year history, while we have wiggled around the Consumer Price Index just a little bit, we've basically stayed on it, and we're currently about $600 above what we would expect to be. If you cut the tuition and state support, the total dollars we had for educational enterprise in 1980, and you inflate them out to today, we're really right on that, within it's about 4%. So we've beat it each year by about 0.15% per year. We really stayed right on the cost of living index, the consumer price index, or the inflation rate. However, when you look at higher education, our costs are different than the consumer price index. The consumer price index is based on a basket of goods that the average household is purchasing. Those aren't the goods that a university purchases. And the Common Fund Institute puts together what's called a higher education price index that is a basket of goods, 45 indicators that measure the cost to higher education. The higher education price index is an inflationary index for what it costs universities in general throughout the country to operate. The green line here indicates the higher education price index. As you can see, the University of Wisconsin is falling further and further behind the cost to do business within our industry sector. So we're remaining a good buy for the state and our students in total, but we are falling further and further behind the actual costs of running an enterprise like the University of Wisconsin. If you look at what's happened with these two fund sources for our total revenue for the educational enterprise, you see that they are broken into state appropriation and the tuition revenue. The red line showing our state appropriation, and while it showed growth from 1980 through about 1998, 2000, it has since leveled off, and tuition has started to fill in those dollars. That these lines even run parallel means that a greater and greater percentage of the funds we have to educate our students are coming from tuition. What I want to do now is look just a little bit at how these two compare to the inflation rate. So in the next slide, and I need to set this up a little bit, what I'm going to do is subtract each of these lines from the inflation rate. So if the tuition is staying right on the inflation rate, then that difference will be zero. There'll be no change relative to the inflation rate. And the same would be true with the state appropriation. So when we do that, in this slide, what we see is the red bars tell us what's happened with the state appropriation relative to inflation, and the blue bars tell us what's happened to the tuition revenues relative to inflation. As you can see from the very beginning, from 1980 to 2012, the state appropriation has always been lagging the inflation rate. And tuition revenues, while initially it's hard to see, but in the first few years we were actually lagging even the inflation rate there as well. But from 1987, 1988 onward, tuition has always risen at a rate greater than the inflation rate. And in particular, the thing that caught my eye on this, and as I showed it to other people, catches their eyes, if you go back about a decade to around 2000, 2002, and look forward, the mirrored nature of these two indices is kind of remarkable. So in the 30 years that we've looked at this, not only have we been a good steward of the resources that we're receiving, being able to keep the total cost of education, the total cost through these revenues, essentially on the consumer price index, the inflation rate, we've also moved our resources from what we call our operational budget into the educational and student services budget. What this slide shows is the relative, how we've repositioned those dollars over the years. So from 1980 until 2011, and then throwing in some inflation, how have we reinvested dollars on a per student basis? And we've put about $503 more into instruction, $380 into academic support, $218 per student into financial aid, $49 into student services. These are all the things that make students much more effective at moving through their programs. We are better able to serve the students. These other areas, institutional support, the physical plant, and all others, which I can explain a little bit, is where we've taken the money from. Those are all indicators of operations on our campus, the physical plant and institutional support. The services to students, that's where we have put more and more resources. You notice that these numbers don't balance out, that there is a $600 difference between the negatives and the positives. And if you remember the very first chart, you'll see that we're about $600, $620 above the inflation rate, and that's where those dollars come from per student. Okay? So over the past 30 years, we really have been very, very good at maintaining what we have spent, because we can only spend the revenues that we have on the educational side of the house. We've been very good at maintaining those at the inflation rate, at the expense of staying on what our true costs are within our industry. So we are seeing some things slip, and we have evidence of some of those things, and I know some of the chancellors will address those. But we have repositioned all those dollars to better support our students, to help increase the achievement of our students, and taking some of those from our operations sides to be able to do that. So all new dollars have gone into instruction and academic support, and even some of the old dollars have shifted to that area. Well, what have we bought for our money? This slide shows actually two graphs here. They look very identical because they're plotting similar things. And what we've plotted is the number of degrees granted in a year divided by the number of students who were enrolled that year, and then taken a percentage of that. So if you look at the red line, which shows us the bachelor's degrees granted divided by all of the undergraduate students enrolled, in 1980, 81, about 14.8% of our student body graduated. All right? So all the students on campus, undergraduates, just under 15% graduated. Now we're up over 18%. That sounds kind of small. It's actually about a 4 percentage point increase. It's about a 22% growth in degree efficiency. So see this line as a measure of degree efficiency. The percentage of your students who are on campus are graduating that year. As an example, think for a moment of an institution that only offers bachelor's degrees. All of their students are undergraduates. If they had a 25% rate in this index, people graduating divided by the people on campus, that institution would have a 100% retention rate and a 100% graduation rate if there are no transfers and things like that. So this sort of tells you how efficient we are over 3 decades. And what we see is real improvement, a 22% improvement from 1981 to 2011. The blue line here shows all of our degrees, so that will include the Associate of Arts degrees, which is a big driver in here, but it also includes the master's, the doctoral degrees, and professional doctoral degrees as well. Overall, the number of degrees awarded has grown by 45% over this period, and our enrollment has grown by 12%. So we have been working with the budget and with the funding sources that have followed in line with inflation. We've repositioned those resources to better serve students so that we can increase our retention rates, our graduation rates, and improve the educational attainment and educational quality of our system. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chancellor Wagner to tell you a little bit about some of the things they've done specifically at the University of Wisconsin-Superior to control costs and to improve their educational attainment. Renee?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about what's happening at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. For some of our new regents and maybe some of you not so new to the board, let me give you a brief snapshot of the campus because I think it's relevant to the discussion today. At the campus, we have about 2,800 students. 52% of those students coming in are first-generation students. 38% of those freshmen are Pell students. In fact, of the campus overall, 68% are participating in the Pell Financial Aid Program. And what that's telling you is that on our campus we have a student body that has a very high degree of financial need. So we're very conscious about trying to control costs for our students. So today I'm going to talk about 3 ways that we do that. And if you'll switch. The first one is to increase access to financial resources. One of the things that we know about our students is that even though they may have financial aid or a scholarship, oftentimes they're working 1 job, sometimes even 2 jobs to be able to afford going to school. So if we can get them to participate in employment on campus, they have a much better chance of succeeding and of retaining those students. We worked very hard the last few years to really increase participation in our Jacket Jobs employment program, our campus program, and now we're over a quarter of the students on campus are employed on campus. And that provides, I think, a number of benefits. One is we know, number one, that they're students first, which means we can be much more accommodating in their work schedule. If they have a group project, need to go out of town for a group project or have an exam, we're much more flexible than what they would find out there in the regular employment market. The other thing that we do is try to match them with skills that are relevant to their area. So what you see here are pictures. The bottom one is a little dark, but it's health and human performance students facilitating a climbing camp. And the other is students that are participating and working with our faculty on the Lake Superior Research Institute. So overall, we actually spend somewhere between 7.5% and 8% of our campus salary budget on student employees. The second one is to reduce program requirements. As much as we adore our students, we really don't want them sticking around for 5 and 6 years to get out and graduate. So we know that one of the culprits is the number of credit hours that go into a program, and sometimes you get curriculum creep. You know, faculty want to put their courses in there, and we really wanted to bring the number of credits down. And what we were seeing is that in looking at our education programs in particular, we had a number of programs that simply had too many credits, 138 credits. It was taking students sometimes 5.5 years to get out, way too long. So we took a step back, took a real hard look at what was necessary, absolutely necessary, what could be left behind, and actually in our elementary education programs reduced the number of credits from 141 to 123, which means, you know, you're shaving off maybe a semester and maybe even a year for those students to get out. And in our secondary education programs, all of those programs now are below 130 credit hours. Which means that students are accumulating less student debt and they're on the street and teaching sooner. The third program, I think, is really unique to our campus, and it's increasing educational attainment by increasing access to distance learning. And I think one of the reasons why this is important, I'm going to draw your attention to the map of Wisconsin, to the mitten. And if you're to draw a line from River Falls and Eau Claire, kind of all the way over. If you look at that acreage up there, the number of square miles, I think the technical term is it's a lot. It's just really unrealistic for those students to be driving to a campus, especially if they're adult learners, they have a job, they've got child care responsibilities. It just simply isn't going to happen. And so making distance learning available is a way to be very cost efficient for those folks to be able to go back and pick up education. We've seen tremendous growth in our distance learning program. Since 2006, it's increased to 82%. 18% now of our student body are distance learners. The top programs that they're engaged in, the first of all is education, but the second one, more importantly, is degree completion. It's a design your own major. We do a lot of prior learning assessment. They come in, and we can get them on their way and get their degree completed. The other nice thing is we're also seeing, as the technology has evolved, a lot more hybrid programs taking advantage of the cost efficiency of distance learning, plus some courses being offered on campus. And our social work program that's gone online is one example there. We're also collaborating with our fellow colleagues across the state to deliver programs that wouldn't be very efficient for any of us to do individually, but we have a real asset if we combine our strengths, and we can deliver it across the state of Wisconsin. And so sustainable management and health and wellness management are two of those programs. Finally, we'd like the experience of our distance learning students to be the same as what they would receive on campus. And one of those things is advising. And if they were an on-campus student, they could wander the halls, pop in and see their advisor, and be on their way. Not so easy if you're a distance learning student and have very strange working hours. So we actually are using technologies like Skype, where they can get that same face-to-face experience except using the technology. Overall, we think that distance learning is a very promising area for us as a campus. We know there's a lot of pent-up demand out there, and we're looking forward to introducing some new programs shortly in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I do thank you for allowing me to talk for a few minutes about what we're doing at UW Stout.
The first cost reduction strategy is our laptop program. We put this in place about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago now. I think by every measure that we have, it's been successful. We wanted to change the way that we taught, change the way students learn, and we've done exactly that. We charge $4,000 a year for the laptop. $1,000 a year for the laptop. After 4 years, is $4,000. The students take that laptop with them when they graduate, so they have a product to leave with. We have tech support from 7:30 to 10 o'clock at night, so anytime there's a problem, we can address that. We're a wireless campus, so there's no issue of being wired. We're entirely wireless, but for some of the lobbies of the residence halls. And we've eliminated, importantly, the need for general access computer labs. We've opened up a lot of space on campus. We had a giant computer lab, general access, that covered about 2,500 square feet of space, about 250 computers. That's gone. We're kind of a walking lab at UW-Stout. And it is rather fun to see freshmen come. They walk around like amoebas in packs of 25 and 30 little backpacks on and heading for class. But it's been a very successful program. And we reduced the cost of that program from $37 a credit hour to this year $27 a credit hour. So it's been a strategic reduction in what we charge. We no longer purchase theft insurance. We self-insure. And we know that we save $200,000 a year on that alone. And also, we eliminated the purchase of backpacks and cables for replacement laptops. They get refreshed after 2 years at UW-Stout, and that saves a real cost of $80,000 a year. So this very important tool that we have adopted is kind of core of what we do there. We've been able to produce some cost savings there. On the next slide, we have saved $110,000 by returning surplus products to departments, furniture, things like that. We recycle that. And that's an actual cost that we can demonstrate we've saved. And most importantly, we're working with River Falls and Eau Claire on further efficiencies on selling surplus property. We think we can triple that amount to $300,000 with the 3 campuses. We're looking at IT. Can we have perhaps the most extreme would be one common CIO for the 3 campuses? We're looking at print. Can we have one campus be the go-to campus for print materials on campus? And purchase. Can we cooperate in a way that makes purchasing more efficient at the 3 schools? So we're working in a very collaborative way right now to explore those areas and see what can happen. The next slide talks about the first is a per-credit tuition model. I think we're the only school in UW that has that as a pilot that we adopted 10 years ago, and sometimes pilots become more permanent, but for us it really does work. We believe that's a very good tuition model for us because you can drill down on each course and look at the cost efficiency of that course, which we do. It does eliminate any kind of subsidy by those who take less than 12 hours, but those who take more than 12 hours. It's a real cost. What you pay for, what you take is what you pay for. It hasn't really affected dramatically our average credit hour load. It hasn't affected dramatically our retention or graduation rates. So for us, it's been a very, very efficient and good model for the campus. We do have 3 undergraduate degree programs, 3-year programs in business administration, hotel, restaurant, and tourism, and psychology, where the students are guaranteed to get out in 3 years if they sign up for that. These aren't large numbers, but it does demonstrate that there is a nascent interest in doing that. We have 17 people enrolled in 3-year programs. We have 28 students enrolled in a 4-year guarantee program that we all have on each campus. So that we market that through our advisors, through our freshman orientation, and it's not necessarily that popular because there are cross currents working against that too. Students don't want to get out in 3 years oftentimes. Those that do, those that don't. And so we encourage that, to look at that, but we don't force them into that. And finally, like Superior, we reduce the credit hours for each program. When I came, we had about 142 or 44 credits per program. We're down to between 120 and 124, with a couple of programs above that, engineering and education, and those are exceptions on our campus. We just finished a very painful and laborious gen ed reform and reduced gen ed by 2 full credits, so that also adds to the, it's painful, believe me, a little further. But that also helps students who get out in less than, in time. I think it's the last slide I have talks about WEAC, which is our athletic conference. And you know, one thing about the state universities here, we control the athletic programs through a conference with a commissioner. And we have taken very seriously how to reduce the cost of athletic program delivery in our conference. We have cost-cutting measures in travel. We require that men's basketball teams and women's basketball teams travel together on a single bus, play on a single day. It eliminates a lot of overnight stay. We have a geographic model where teams can't go outside a certain geography so that to cut back costs. And that cuts back lodging costs, travel costs, food costs. And in talking to the commissioner, we save an annual total of $450,000 in the last 4 or 5 years by these strict measures. And the chancellors are very serious about controlling the athletic quality and the athletic costs, and we do that. We meet normally monthly. We have a very strong commissioner, and this is, again, an attempt to reduce costs for the athletic programs.
Thanks, Chuck. Mike.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about the way we're keeping costs down in Milwaukee. I'm going to talk about a single program that we have on our campus, and then talk about Nashville Report that I think puts things in perspective for the whole system. And before I go into our first program, I also want to point out that, you know, when we pulled together from the campuses all the different cost-covering measures, we had dozens and dozens of programs and pages that I think that were made available to you. So I think that, you know, we're showing you a snapshot of what really is pervasive across all of our campuses and the things we're trying to do. The first thing I want to talk to you about is something called our Life Impact Program. And as many of you know, we have a lot of non-traditional students in Milwaukee that come back and get their degree later in life. And so one of the things we focused on was trying to establish a way to assist older students, those with families, to better attain higher education. Because we know it's often a challenge. You know, when you're an older student, you have a family, you have time commitments, you have financial commitments that really can make it difficult for you. And so we were able to get some funding with the Great Lakes Higher Education Guarantee Corporation and the Jane Bradley Pettit Foundation to really instill a program that I think is great for our older students that have families. And essentially what the program does is it provides a laptop computer for their academic and professional growth, and it also provides something I think is really important, is emergency funds to assist students and graduates, because we all know that when you're older and you have a family, you're supporting that family, things can come up. You know, you don't want to have the fact if your heater breaks down that you have to drop out of school because you can't afford it to fix your heater, as an example. So this emergency fund, students can apply for on a need basis to really help where financial crises come up, so that they can still remain in school and not have it interfere with their academic plan. The program also brings together a life coach team that really helps them assist with obtaining additional scholarships, this is the one in the life program itself, helping balancing their credit load, helps them graduate sooner, and really finding family stay employment once they graduate. So there's a team that really is put together to help them in all these different unique aspects of their lives that maybe traditional students wouldn't encounter. They actually are given access to, you know, specialized computer rooms and stations, printing office supplies, so we have a special place for them that they can go and do their work. And they also, we give them a series of workshops when they're in the program in support service that focus on family budgeting and meeting family needs in areas of health care, you know, food and child care. So it's really an infrastructure and support structure to let them be successful. And as it turns out, as you can imagine, these students are mature, they're very serious about their education, and when they're given the support they need, they're actually very successful. I think the program has resulted in an 86% graduation rate for the 118 students that participated. I want to point out this is more than twice our current graduation rate of 42%, or six-year graduation is 42%, so they're more than doubly successful of our average typical students. 95% of these students have either reported being employed directly out of the program or have gone on to further education in graduate school. And I think one of the things that we're most proud of is that how much money we're saving these students in the program. We have an average of almost $20,000 less debt coming out of this program. It, we think is really an important aspect of this. The other thing I want to point out as I talk with Mark about what we would want to present today, I think we're going to talk about a national report that shows how lean UWM and how we're already controlling our costs. But I just want to say that I think that all UW system schools, if they were put under a similar ranking among their peers nationally, would fare very well, because I think that, as Mark has already pointed out, we really do a good job on our campuses of keeping costs down. And what I'm going to highlight are some results from Goldwater Institute reports that was specifically talking about bloat in American universities and what were the reasons for the higher cost of education. And this report was the top 198 research universities in the country, so that was the peer for the basis of comparison. So as you'll see with the numbers, UWM came out looking very strong in terms of the value that we're getting for the state input for our students. When you look at the actual numbers in the report, when you start pulling out some of the data, we find that UWM is the 12th least in the country in annual spending per student. We spend $13,000 per average per student, when the national average is $41,000. We're also 12th lowest in terms of our instructional, research, and service staff ratio per 100 students. We have 3.5 of the instructional staff per 100 students. The national average is 7 per 100 students. We're almost one half of the national average of our staff per student ratio. Moving on to administrative staff per student ratio, we have 3.6 administrative staff per 100 students. The national average is 9.4. So we are almost 1/3 of administrative staff. We talk about keeping the cost down per student. Both our instructional and administrative staff are much lower than national averages. And I think it's important to point out, and in times when we're being so lean and we look in terms of keeping our costs down so much, what has happened on our campus during this time? Well, we've had a 25% enrollment growth over the last decade. We've increased our number of graduates by 39%, so well over 5,000 per year. Research growth is 170% over that time frame. And what I think is really critical, as many of you know, last year when we presented the ACE survey results of our graduates over the last 15 years for the UW system, our students had a 96% graduate satisfaction rate. So people feel like they're getting a great value for the quality of their education receiving in our campus. And I think all of us should be very proud of the accomplishments and the good stewards that we are showing with the state's input. I think these numbers really dictate. I know they show UWM specifically, but as pointed out, I think all the institutions would have similar ratios when compared to their peers nationally. And I think one other thing I just want to point out before I stop, Mark really showed how we really focused our resources on our campus towards instruction and to the benefit of the students. And I think that that has really been the case, and even in the current budget lapse and the cuts we're facing, we've really focused on keeping our sections open and not doing everything we can to minimize the impact on the students. And I think we've done that very well, but I think we all need to recognize there's a price to pay when doing that. As we move things to instruction, other parts of support for our campus are dwindling. I showed how when we support students in the right way in the Life Impact Program, they're very successful. Well, the ratios in some other parts of our campus are the ones that are being impacted. For example, in our College of Letters and Science, we currently have an 800-to-1 student-to-advisor ratio. In our mental health, which we know there's just an article out, we have a 3,500 students per mental health advisor in our health center. And particularly with the stress on students, in fact, we're up to 1,400 veterans on our campus who oftentimes need more mental health help. These are areas that we need to be to realize it is, we have our budgets cut and we move to keeping our instruction. There's other parts of our campus we need to be worried about, particularly when we know students who are better supported have higher graduation and retention rates.
Thank you. Before we go into the question and answer period, first of all, I'd like to thank the three chancellors for coming up and helping us, but I'd also like to thank all the chancellors. The materials that are in your packet were really put together by them and their staffs, and they did a tremendous job not only of putting these materials together, but I think of managing their institutions over this 30-year period to help keep these costs down and be effective stewards of the resources they have. I also want to thank the Office of Policy Analysis and Research, Heather Kim and Gail Bergman in particular, for helping pull together some of this data. Also the Office of Budget, Frida Harris and her staff, but in particular Lynn Paulson. And finally Rebecca Karoff and Bob Yokish in my office. There really has been a pretty big team that's gathered all of this together so that you can get a little better picture of at least the instructional side of funding and the costs and how they're being controlled on our campus. So at this time, we'd like to open the floor up for questions and answers of the panel, but also of the other chancellors that are in the room. So, yeah, Mike.
Do you mind if I call on people? Mike?
Sure.
Is that okay? First, I want to say thank you very much. It was very in-depth and enlightening analysis. We appreciate it. Jose.
Also, thank you for very good presentations. And I want to follow up on Chancellor Lovell's comments at the very end and ask it maybe slightly different. How do we avoid and how are you monitoring and what can you tell us as Regents where you can get to the point where you take so much pride in how much you're reducing, you're more efficient, you're cheaper, to the point where you finally cross that threshold that somebody says, boy, if you're that cheap, you're probably not that good. What can you say about that? How are we as a system ensuring that we don't get to that point just because others are saying you got to be cheaper, and eventually you get to that point and then it starts to work against you and somebody's saying, well, Marquette doesn't look that bad even though it's $umpteen, but they must have something good to offer that you can't offer because you're so cheap.
I think you raised what I would consider to be a philosophical question, and we all realize that there's a point in time where as you continue to have less resources overall, when you talk about GPR tuition, and Mark showed those dollars, when you compare to inflation, are going down, so the overall dollars. So there's a point where what happens if that gets low enough, you can't become any more efficient, you're going to offer less quality. And I think that we're approaching that point now. We need to consider, and that's something we talked about for those of you who we had the task force we got for restructuring. We had presentations. I think David Ward did a great job actually explaining this more philosophical debate we need to have as a society, particularly for the state. We need to consider, do we want to continue to cut the cost of higher ed to a point where we're going to have less quality, or are we going to look at it as an investment for our future? And I think that's a debate that we're going to have. And I think you've raised a great point. I think I can certainly tell on my campus I'm not sure what else I can do to cut the cost without making sure that, and without having the quality degrade of that education.
We do two things, more than that, mentioned. Each of our programs has an advisory board of professionals, and they meet, some meet every quarter, some meet more often, but they are kind of a litmus test on what we're doing in those programs and what the graduates are getting when they enter the profession, so that if we cut back too much, we hear from the boards. And in fact, because of some of the boards, we've reinvested more heavily in some programs where we knew that there was that decline in quality. And the other, I would point to graduation, to placement rates. If they like our graduate product, they will hire our people. And every fall, we have about 250 to 300 corporations come on our campus to recruit interns or to recruit professionals. And so that if they began to decrease those numbers, we know that we should look at it more carefully. So I think there are measures you can look at, although Mike has a good point. There is a line you'll cross.
I think one of the things that I'd like to point out is that in some ways, in some places, we may be seeing that we've crossed that line. When you look at our faculty salaries, they are not keeping up, and our academic staff salaries, they aren't keeping up. And that goes back to the first slide where we showed what has happened with our funding relative to the higher education price index. we're falling further and further behind that, and in particular, a lot of that is in our salaries and benefits packages that we offer to our employees. And we have shifted a lot of that on many of our campuses by reducing the number of tenure-track faculty and increasing the number of adjuncts on our campuses. It's one way to control these prices, but at some place you cross that line.
And I think it's a great point, Mark, and I would just say for my campus, and I'm sure other of the chancellors can say similar things. Over the last year, I lost 41 faculty to other institutions that got better offers and more competitive salaries. And that's something we should all be concerned about when we have, and those are the top 5% of our faculty. And how many years in a row can we lose that top 5% before the quality of our institutions goes significantly down?
What was that number again, Mike?
41.
Judy.
I want to ask a question along the same lines because I think it's important. I think that both the staffing level, as you've described, Chancellor Lovell, in terms of providing support, as well as number of students per class, and the issue of salaries are part of this. But also, as you make decisions about reducing credits, for instance, how do you balance whether or not the ultimate quality of the degree is changed? I know that that's given serious consideration because of meetings of the Education Committee over the years, but I'd like to have you address that, because reducing the number of credits says something about what's been reduced and what has been eliminated.
I think our professionals, our faculty, and they're the ones that should know what goes into a major. But beyond that, we have regional accreditation, Higher Learning Commission accredits the university, all of our universities, and we have probably for a large percent of our programs specialized accreditation, where they drill down very deeply into the major and say you're deficient here, you're strong here, and address the deficiency. So I have witnessed the other thing in my career. I've been in leadership positions for 30 years in public higher ed, Michigan, Minnesota, and here. And what I have witnessed is that faculty are more apt to add to the total credits, and they look at new information as a new course rather than integrating the information throughout the curriculum. So I would look at it just the other way around, that more credit doesn't mean a better education.
I wasn't meaning to imply that, but how you make that decision is...
And it starts with well-defined learning goals. So, before the program, in theory, before the program even came online, you had a definite set of what you wanted your outcomes to be, and you're measuring against those outcomes. And oftentimes, it maybe isn't as deliberate in some cases that they've mapped where things are supposed to happen in the curriculum to achieve those outcomes. And I think that you can add stuff on because you're not integrating well or you're not being very deliberate. And so it's really paying attention to those things to achieve the same outcomes.
One thing that I've witnessed in my career, I think that what we're talking about today are cutting around the edges. And we've done that for 40 years in public higher education. I think that what we aren't talking about is systemic change in how we say we deliver information and knowledge, and that's changing out there. You're going to approve, hopefully, 2 programs today from my campus that is truly collaborative, integrative, and across disciplines. And this is the way information is now. It's not, you don't take a biology major anymore, it's just biology. You take biology that's associated with psychology, with environmental science, with all of that. So I think that we have to look at systemic change in how we define a degree, and what does do we deliver the course properly? Is the proper delivery a 3-credit course in my field, history, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, until they reach 45 hours of credit and get a major? I don't know if that, I doubt that is. But we aren't challenging the basic fundamental philosophy of how we deliver courses right now, or programs. And I think ultimately that's going to be what we have to do, and that will then transform how we become more efficient.
Jeff.
I want to raise the question that occurred to me by something that Chancellor Sorensen said, which is had to do with the 3-year undergraduate degree programs that Stout has instituted in the area of business administration, hotel, restaurant, and tourism. And you said something about students push back on the 3-year. Right. And one of the cost containment measures that we are all aware of is the streamlining of general education curricula, reducing required credits. And there was a op-ed piece that appeared in the Clips recently about tuition, and said students are spending longer than ever on campus, which is one of the reasons why tuition costs, or the cost of higher education, is going up for those students. Is there something wrong with what we're doing in offering a graduation, offering a degree for fewer credits? How do we get students interested in getting their degree and getting off campus? I mean, is that a problem?
I don't know the answer, but we've seen it stout, at least, that they're not rushing to more efficiency and entering to graduation, entering the job force. And they're the ones that, for the most part, some parental control is there, but for the most part, they call the shots on that. So I don't know the exact answer to that. I think we perhaps aren't selling it properly, but these kids come at 18, and they don't want to enter the workforce at 21, with the traditional student.
I could share a personal anecdote. Back in 2001, a student that I have some familiarity with left my home and went to college, and I asked her one day, what will she be doing 4 years from now? And she said, I'll be starting my senior year at the institution she was headed to. And I said, well, I kind of thought you'd be graduating. She said, Dad, it's going to take me 5 years. I said, why is it going to take you 5 years? She said, well, I'm in a very tough major. I want to swim on the swim team a little bit. And the national average is 5 years, so I probably can't do it. And I said, Megan, if you go to school thinking it's going to take you 5 years, I know you can't get done. She swam on the swim team. She double majored. She studied abroad. She graduated in 4 years. But if we hadn't had that conversation about you've got to set the goals early, I don't think it would have happened. And I think that's very, very common as I talk to students across campuses, coming in assuming that it's going to take them 5 or planning on 5. And it's very difficult to get pulled back from that if you don't go in with that mindset. And you do kind of have to know what you're going to do.
Yeah, these are the students. This is the student that likes the options. It's the options generation, and they want flexibility. And so they'll pick up a second major knowing full well it's going to take them an extra semester because they want the options.
Mr. Walsh.
It's undisputed that there simply are fewer public funds available for higher education. 10 years ago, we took a $250 million hit, but we backfilled it with tuition increases. This year, we have an excessive $250 million hit, and we don't have the option of tuition increases. My question for you is that, number one, what is your sense of this debt burden on students today? And what's different about what the new normal is we have a recession. We have graduate school students, law students that don't have jobs. These kids don't have jobs. And then you talk to us about 3,500 to 1 for mental health and 800 to 1 at L&S for counseling. At some point, the quality of this education isn't worth it. When are you going to come to us and say, it's time to cut enrollment because of the lack of funds? Or will you never do that?
Well, I think you had several questions in there, and I want to address kind of the first one. One of the things that what I worry about is where I see an increasing debt in our students is the fact that we have 46% of our students need remedial work, and they come to our campus and are taking classes that they're not even getting credit for towards their degree, and they're paying for these classes and taking on financial aid and student loans and debt, when a decade ago only 32% of those students needed remedial work. So there's a 14% increase right there of those students that are taking on more debt that didn't have in the past, and I think that's part of the equation as well. I think students that come to our campuses better prepared can get out in 4 years. Those that do not have trouble getting through in 5 or even 6 years. And so, I'm not sure. I think the other question, again, is something I think we need to have a real philosophical discussion on, is at what point should we look at enrollments and say maybe we shouldn't have as many students, even though we all know that we want to have as many students, attain graduation as possible. The only thing I will just say is that we've looked at, just from a financial viewpoint, 30% of our students with a 40% graduation rate financially, it doesn't get us nearly as far as 20,000 students with a 60% graduation rate. We actually get more credit hours and more funds to our campus for getting less students, but having a higher percentage of them graduate.
But I guess my question is, the quality's going down just because you're telling us in the other areas like mental health and counseling, and we've got a significant problem on funds. When is the message to us that it's time to cut enrollment? Will that happen? And I wouldn't have asked this question but for the fact that there's a lot of people question the value of higher education if they can't get a job, and yet they're so burdened. So at some point these lines are going to cross. And I'm just curious as to when you think those will cross, and you'll come and say the best solution is less enrollment.
I think that raises a fundamental question about the historic role of state universities. Not as much research one, but the state universities' access versus selectivity. We've run models on my campus to look at our average ACT is about 21.8, and we get skewered for that periodically because it's not as high as, say, La Crosse or other schools. And yet the output's pretty good, good placement. But if we would reduce our freshman class by about 125 or 30 a year over 4 years, that would increase about 23.2. We know that. We run the models on that. Retention rates go up, graduation rates go up, and we look like a quote, better university. So we could do that, and yet we deny access to some of those that deserve it. I'm asking for an honorary degree today by a person that said, I didn't think I could go to college until I came to Stout in the summer of whatever it was. And he's an extraordinarily successful professional today. And without that access, he wouldn't be there. So I think it's that basic, as Mike said, philosophic question, access versus selectivity. We can increase retention graduation by increasing selectivity. We have a model that demonstrates that.
I'd like to ask Kevin to respond to that.
Just a really narrow response to Regent Walsh's question. I think, the question of what jobs are available now as we're really struggling to come out of a terrible recession is a temporary issue in all likelihood. Anything we know when we look at the longer-term data is that more and more of the jobs of the future will require people to have some level of college degree. And the narrow point is that even in the midst of this recession, when you look at how people have fared who have no high school diploma, a high school diploma only, some college credit or a baccalaureate degree, as you move up that chain, the unemployment rate goes down. I mean, people who have college, even in a recession, are much less harmed than people who don't.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking the question right. The economic model doesn't work forever. Can't keep being cut. At some point you make a decision that the quality of this education isn't fair to the students.
Right.
And we have to cut enrollment. I'm not saying we should. I'm asking the question, when do you reach that point?
I think the answer
Because otherwise all we do is keep getting cut, keep having these meetings, pat ourselves on the back for what we're doing and educate more, and the experience isn't as good.
That topic is virtually a topic of conversation at every chancellor's meeting now. And I think the simple answer is, when we think we've reached that point, we'll come and tell you. And it may be sooner than any of us would like.
That was my question. When? And the answer is you don't know.
I can't tell you a date,
but you don't
I can't
know.
say next Friday.
Right.
The system has cut enrollments over the years. There was a period from the early 90s, the mid-90s, where enrollment caps were put in place.
That was
and
in the
enrollments
80s.
were maintained. Yeah.
I'm going to stop from up here for a minute to hear some wisdom from Chancellor Gao.
Now I'm on the spot. I just quickly, I don't know that I'd the notion that quality is going down, I don't know that I would agree with that. I think what is going down, as you've heard, is the compensation of our people, and they keep delivering. That's how this all works. I mean, people say to me, how can you do it? I mean, you got your state funding is being cut, tuition won't replace it, so something's being taken out. It's the compensation of our people, and I guess your question is, at what point will they sort of give up on this and compromise their commitment to our students? Fortunately, they are great people, and I don't see that happening soon, but That's our big challenge, and we talk about that all the time. How do we maintain morale throughout this? So the other point about enrollment limits, at my institution, that would hurt us by limiting enrollment. We're actually taking more students because we're so tuition-driven now, and I think that's the future trend. So, you know, we're going to have to think about that in the picture as well.
And those were wise comments. Mark, you had a...
Well, as you know, as if running your institutions you didn't have enough to worry about. I just want you to comment on how worried you are when you think of your institution long term. You've been able to put increased dollars into instruction and academic support. But you've really taken a lot of dollars out of your physical plan. You must have a lot of deferred maintenance. You must have tell me how concerned you are about when that is going to come back to haunt.
Well, I don't know the exact answer. I think we've been very fortunate last decade in getting projects, renovation projects, or two new building projects. We maintain our property very carefully, a good maintenance staff. I asked my physical plant director, what is deferred maintenance at Stout? She said $50 million. That includes auxiliary for new roofs for residence halls, projected renovation of residence halls. We have a master plan for that. So I don't know the exact answer, because I'm rather pleased with the way we have maintained that physical plant at UW Stout. There's nothing about to implode right now, maybe but for our coal-burning heating plant, that's all.
Any other comments, Mike or Renee? Mark?
That's all that we have for the presentation. I'd like to.
Any other questions?
Absolutely.
I'm in on that specific.
Oh, no.
Deferred maintenance. Any other questions? Any other comments? Sorry.
Just a quick question on sort of what I would consider to be the kind of the multiple dimensions of affordability, as you're sort of laying out these various scenarios and the effect as you're dealing with these budget cuts and budget reductions and redistributing dollars and 800 to 1 student advisor ratios. It seems to me almost by definition is going to potentially increase the time to degree for some students who lack access to an advisor to help navigate through a system, mental health, all kinds of other things. And I guess I'm just curious if there are measurements. I mean, we obviously spend a lot of time when we talk about affordability about worrying about tuition increases. But the greatest effect on increasing the cost is 4.5, 5, 6-year time to degree issues. And sort of how are you three or other chancellors sort of beginning, if at all, to give us some metrics or some measurements to sort of look at maybe the hidden costs of some of these various reductions and increases in class size and reduction in sections and reduction in infrastructure? Is there any conversation going on, or is there any way to begin to get at that? Because I think folks love numbers, and they love to see the tangible implications as opposed to sort of the theoretical idea of what might be happening.
So I don't think we've ever really quantified what you're asking, but I can certainly, all of us probably have anecdotal, evidence. I cannot go meet with a student group without one of the discussion points being, I'm a senior, I need this one course to graduate, I can't get into the course, I can't get into the section, so I have to stay longer and look for other classes to fill my schedule so I can get that last course. And so I know it's there, but I'm not sure we've actually measured it. And actually, I want to get back to maybe something that Joe said, and I think this again maybe kind of highlights some of the discussion. At what point did we get pushback? At what point do we have that breaking point? Well, this semester actually I had a faculty member who was in one of our schools and colleges. His class was full, and there was 4 or 5 seniors that needed to get into the class to graduate, and he stood up and says, no, I haven't had a raise in 6 years. Why would I bring more work on myself and invite more people into the class? And we had a very philosophical session about that with that faculty member, and we've got him to change his mind. But that's kind of the mindset of some of our faculty. They have reached a point where they said enough is enough, I'm undercompensated, why would I continue to take on more work? Because really the way we've done this, you saw how lean we are, it's the people on our campus are the ones that have allowed us to do what we've done with less resources, and we should be very proud of the people we have on our campuses because how entrepreneurial and hardworking they've been.
I'd like to finish this part up in 5 minutes. So, John?
Just going off what Mike just said, I think the chancellors, the faculty, and the staff throughout the system deserve a tremendous amount of credit for what they're trying to do to maintain quality in the face of some really difficult times. And I think, just some of the things we've heard today, for example, 41 faculty members leaving UWM. I know, was that in the last year, Mike? Is just an indication of how bad things are. And I think we need to continue to make the case, and I think President Riley has made the case very in a very articulate and passionate manner about the need for just in the immediate sense against the budget lapse that is going to have a disproportionate impact on UW compared to the rest of the state, and the overall trend in funding, which I hate to say it, but it really got bad when I got on the board. But so I would say I think we need to continue to make that case, and to obviously we have to keep doing the things we're doing for cost reduction activities, and have to engage students and faculty and staff in being part of coming up with those ideas. But I also think we have to reject the notion that this is inevitable, that we're going to continue to get cuts, and the fact that we're talking about when do we start decreasing access and cutting enrollment, I think is another indication of just what bad shape we're in. So I think, in addition to President Riley, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to get that story out there about just how bad things are in the institutions, what's happening with the faculty, and what the challenges are out there.
All right, speaking of President Riley, he goes next, and then we'll finish with Jose.
Just wanted to pick up on Regent Pruitt's question really about what about the expenses for students and families that are not tuition, the student fees, wider range of expenses. And I think that is something we paid more attention to in recent years. Regent Pruitt, now that he's back in the room, I'll compliment him on the work that he really got us started on textbook costs, for instance. And we need to constantly be looking at those other costs. One of the interesting hidden dynamics here, I think, is that this board in recent years, and as a matter of fact on its agenda today, has had proposals from students to raise the fees on themselves, because very many things that in the past were covered by state GPR as part of the core undergraduate education experience, we can't afford to do or do in the right way anymore. And the students know that, and they've said, we really want to raise the fee so we can have more freshman year advisors. We want to raise a fee so that in a more expensive program we can have the more expensive program or more expensive equipment that we need. So that's happening because the state has reduced the subsidy. The students feel that pain, and then they say, maybe this is so important to us that we need to find a way to cover it out of our own pockets in a non-tuition way. That's an interesting, again, dynamic I think we need to articulate better and say this is a hidden cost of the constant cutting that we've undergone. Another thing that I'll mention in Mike's example of the sort of closing out of a course and a faculty member saying, no, I won't add 4 new students. I connect that up to what Chancellor Sorensen was talking about in regards to serious change in the way we deliver higher education at the core of how we interact with our students. And Chancellor Ward's been articulate about this since he's been back as well. You could argue now that if we were doing more of the course delivery the way more information is transmitted, and indeed the way our students, I think, are pushing us to do more of it, and you had an electronic version of the core lectures in a course, and then you had guides on the side, whether they were graduate students or other kinds of faculty, helping students to interpret what the information transfer that went on and that electronic delivery by the core professor, you would probably be able to add students much more easily onto course sections that were popular and that given students might need to graduate. So I think we should be connecting some of those dots in the way we think about how we need to transform our core enterprise in a way that will hold down costs. But the final leave-away, Mike, or takeaway I'd leave with the board is when you look at some of these numbers that, especially in Mike's presentation, he put out about how much lower we are than our peer institutions with whom we compete for students, with whom we compete for academic reputation. It's startling. I mean, if anybody says to you, you know, the University of Wisconsin is spending money hand over fist, they don't know what they're doing, they're not holding down costs, I'd say to them, show me your numbers. We have the numbers that show we're doing quite the opposite. But finally, money does matter in any human enterprise. It's connected to quality. And if the resources, if the dollars get so low, the quality does slip in this business as in any other business. And it's our role together, I think, working with the state, working with the federal government, working with faculty, staff, and students, all our partners, to figure out how not to let that happen in the current environment.
Jose, you still want to speak?
Yes, but it probably won't lead to a question, so hopefully that'll cut back on it. I guess I just want to, again, bring up the question about following up on David also. When do we say we are not going to take any more students because of the quality? But I also want to add another dimension, and Mike, again, you brought this up to some extent. We're going to continue to see more and more students of color, more and more students that are coming to our campuses with diverse needs. And two of my dear and near populations are students of color and students with disabilities. And I get concerned that in trying to serve those that have needs before they can get, as you brought up, we're going to have to take care of something before you get into the degree, actual degree. How are we going to give them as much of a guarantee as that ideal student that comes to us already with all the fundamentals and could make it through 4 years? And I get very worried about that, because those are growing populations. And I don't think they're going to, that no matter, and notwithstanding with our wonderful superintendent here, that no matter what the schools do, the population of students that are going to come to university campuses that are going to need help once they're there is continuing to grow. And I think that we have to give them as much of a guarantee as we can to that ideal student that comes to us that needs little or no help from us, and they're going to make it through. And that's what worries me about all of this discussion, is that sometimes we focus on that ideal student going through, and yet we've got these, at least for me, these other two populations that don't meet that ideal incoming student.
Thank you, Jose. Mark?
Mike, I'd just like to make a few closing comments to wrap this up. Our results, the financial results, the things that we heard from the chancellors, the things you have from all of our campuses are very similar to things that you will hear from public institutions across the country. And I'd like to raise a point that I know Chancellor Wells was able to make to President Obama in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, or just over a week ago now, that as this national debate continues about cost, too often it's focused just on the tuition. And it's driven by what's happening on a handful of very elite public universities. What's important for us to remember as stewards and servants of a public institution is to keep our eye on the subsidized price, because there are lots of things that help offset that price. In the private institutions, it's financial aid, whether that's federal or private, or federal or private. For us, the subsidized price here in Wisconsin is offset by the state appropriation, by federal, state, and private grants, but also by loans. And the thing that has been growing the most in those subsidized prices has been the loans. So as the national debate continues about the cost, they're focusing on the cost to student. And that isn't just what's happening with tuition, it's what's happening with these other subsidizing factors. And it's very important as that national debate continues to keep those factors in mind, that there are a lot of things controlling this tuition other than just the operational cost of the institutions. Thank you for your attention and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the chancellors as well. We now turn to several reports. The first is an update from the Legislative Task Force chaired by Regent Falbo. Our timing is fortunate. The task force met again yesterday and was aware of the report from Regent Vice President Smith's Ad Hoc Working Group on System Structure and Governance that he will discuss after Regent Falbo's update. So Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. The Special Task Force on UW Restructuring and Operational Flexibilities had its third meeting Wednesday, February 8th. No, second meeting. Third.
It seems like there's been.
It's been so much fun. Yes, third meeting, as I said. Chancellors David Ward from Madison and Mike Lovell from Milwaukee gave a joint presentation on the relationship between the UW system and our two doctoral institutions. The chancellors observed that the structure of the UW system allows for a diversity of institutions that tie to a statewide system, including access and choice for students, as well as fostering transfer among UW institutions. The chancellors presented an advisory board model under which the Board of Regents would retain its role, but would receive additional input from institutional level boards. These boards would have 2 to 3 regent appointed as members, which would allow greater understanding of institutional issues, problems, and concerns, provide an enhanced communication flow about institutions to the full Board of Regents, and inform region policy decisions with institutional perspectives. The chancellors also point out that system administration is moving to a customer service focus and playing a more coordinating and strategic role. It was noted that the primary challenge in gaining flexibilities from state control rather than from the Board of Regents or system administration. The task force members generally supported this concept. However, it also noted and emphasized that as much as any enhanced governance system, the institutions need additional flexibilities to meet their fiscal challenges, both in terms of achieving savings through items such as procurement flexibility and retaining faculty and staff through personnel flexibilities. The task force will be discussing flexibilities, including procurement and capital issues at the April meeting. The task force also discussed the idea of a social compact, primarily in terms of state support for higher education. There's been a gradual shift from classic post-war model of high state support and low tuition toward lower state support with higher tuition. This shift has occurred due to the fiscal realities confronting the states rather than through any specific policy or decision. As state support has decreased, this revenue has been replaced with tuition. All chancellors, including those who are members of the task force, expressed concern about the potential impact on quality as revenues continue to be restricted. So I think there seems to be a common thread in everything we do and talk about. As I said, we'll be taking a closer look at flexibilities in the next meeting. Next meeting is focusing on human resource and credit transfer, and the April meeting will focus on procurement and capital planning. I'll be very open to answering any questions or
let's see if we have anybody have any questions for Mike about the task force, its progress, its future. Tim.
Not a question. Just want to point out that I think the structure that Regent Falbo has devised for our task force has been excellent. Our first 3 meetings have been essentially data dumps, so that everybody's on the same page for the discussion that follows. And I think we've done a great job of managing that information flow.
Great, thank you.
I have one question. The flexibility
Judy,
here.
one thing before you start. Who else from our group is on your committee, Mike? Why don't you chancellors and
Mark Tyler is on,
Mark?
and Tim.
Yeah.
We have 3 chancellors.
Rich?
Chancellor Wells, Chancellor Cross, way in the back of the room. He must have done something bad last night. And Chancellor Shields.
Great. Now, Judy.
My question is that the flexibilities that you're talking about are for all campuses.
Yes. Yes, and the discussion about these boards wasn't necessarily just for the doctoral campuses, although that was the focus of the presentation. Certainly that flexibility exists today.
And Brent will elaborate more on that, I think.
Yeah.
Comments. Anybody else? Jeff.
Speaking of data dump, I was just wondering, in addition to the regents and the chancellors who are on the Falbo committee, can I call it that? What input does system have to provide information? We have a memo. We have a couple of extensive memos on tuition and structure and governance and so on. Is the committee considering getting that and considering those?
The system has been great for me. They've been the backbone of support from my standpoint. Our support group includes the system, and we have two representatives, David Miller and Jessica Tormey, but it includes more than that. I've spent a lot of time talking to people at the system, and they've been a fantastic help. It also includes 3 people at the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. And for anybody that wants to see everything that's going out and everything that's being provided, you just have to, you can go to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau site. They're kind of our disseminators of information. And also there's a couple of people from the Department of Administration in our support group. So there's a lot of inputs coming in. The system has, as you would expect, been my most meaningful source of information, and they've been great.
I think, Jeff, you ought to get an example. My understanding is, for example, the tuition paper that the system put together came to the attention of the commission, and there are probably other examples of system-prepared documents.
Yes, we actually have working groups that have produced white papers on each of the 6 topics that the Falbo task force is charged with taking up. So we've been supplying those at the appropriate time, and Mike and I have certainly talked a lot about what he wants from system administration, and we're trying to be responsive through David and through Jessica's good work with him.
Thank you, Mike. I asked some time ago the Ad Hoc Working Group on System, Structure, and Governance, chaired by Vice President Smith, to focus on one of the 6 task force subjects on a timetable and in a manner that complements the work of the task force. For that reason, Regent Smith is not seeking our formal approval of any proposal today. Instead, his report is intended to provide us with information, context, and ideas. Our discussion will parallel the work of the task force, and we will reserve any final decision until late spring on any position we choose to take. And I know Mike is comfortable with that as well as a way of proceeding. So, Brett.
Thank you, Mike. I'll try to give some comment on our report and then ask the other members of our committee if they would want to add anything. And I want to especially thank them and point out to everybody who those other committee members are. It's Regent Crane, Chancellor Levin Stankiewicz, Chancellor Lovell, Chief of Staff Richards, Regent Pruitt, and Chancellor Wells. And really want to thank for a lot of hard work. But probably most of the work of all of the people that we're going to mention went to Jane and Jess. Jane and I got to know our weekend schedules way too well over the last couple of months as we put together several drafts to submit to our committee, and that finally came together with our final report of last week. So they deserve a lot of the credit for today's report. Just to go back as far as the origin of our report, some of it had to do with one of the white papers of the task force that was just mentioned. But the other main source of where it came from was from the President's Advisory Committee on the Roles of the UW System Administration, the Pruitt Committee, or Pruitt Commission. So there was extensive discussion with that group about, and I think especially among the chancellors, as to whether some type of institutional level board would be of some assistance and what type of board that would be. And one of the recommendations that came from that committee to President Rilick was to look into the institutional level board concept. So just want to make sure we all know where this all started. The issue really that we had was, given the political, given the economic, given the administrative environment we live in today, is our structure. What structure is best for the UW system? And what we have now, does it need any changes? That context was, looking at state funding and the lapse, looking at flexibilities, looking at what is identified in our paper as the public purpose of universities, the flexibilities that we've been granted, the roles, the changing roles, certainly of chancellors. What is the structure that we should be looking at, and let's have a discussion at. And I think the answer was, and I think I mentioned it, or we mentioned it one time in our report, that we thought there could be significant changes made, but not what we'd call dramatic changes. And I think as you read the report, hopefully you got that feel. What approach did we take in getting to our conclusions? We certainly, as you saw, work of Jess and Jane talked to, I think, all of the chancellors, we should have, as far as their feeling on institutional level boards. We studied other systems, as you saw, and you saw some of the attachments related to that. We certainly relied in part on the work of Chancellor Lovell and Chancellor Ward, and Mike Felbo referred to that as to the presentation they made yesterday. And we also looked at some of the comments that the work of the task force, and particularly those of Ames McGinnis, one of the first speakers you had. So we tried to get all that information, of course, our experience in coming to our conclusions. And if you didn't get it from our report, you certainly should have, and repeated, we are all with flexibilities. We are all, this is the direction our system is going, and all of this, we think, is consistent with the move we've made in recent times on flexibility. For us, the question, again, was not if, but when and how. And we're also recognize that if, and again, we want to say when we get more flexibilities, we can look at this issue again as to the relationship between our respective, the Board of Regents and what would be local, more institutional boards. We centered, of course, as you read it, on three entities: institutional level boards, regional educational councils, and a system-wide advisory council. Some that exist in some form today, some that, of course, don't. As far as institutional level board, we advised, as Chancellor Ward and Chancellor Lovell, but all of our group, an advisory as opposed to a governing structure. And I think the reasons were laid out in our report. Many of those reasons came from our chancellors, who we talked to, as to the desire to make that an advisory as opposed to a governing system at this point in time. But it is a new concept as to what was being suggested as an institutional level board, not only for Madison and Milwaukee, as Mike pointed out, but for other of our institutions. I think what we saw was a desire to make it just a little more formal than it's been, maybe enhance what they do, and we talked about things like accountability for each institution. Wanted to reflect the uniqueness of each of our institution. You saw words like advise, advocate, fundraise. Those are some of the concepts we saw with those institutional level boards that not only the chancellors identified, but our group identified as well. This would be discretionary. This is not something that the regents would mandate and say, you have to have an institutional level board that has these functions, these roles, this membership. This would be a discretion. Many of the chancellors have those at their campuses now. And this would just be, hopefully, a way to enhance those institutional level boards with the possibility, again, not mandatory, that a Board of Regents, one or more members of the Board of Regents would be part of those boards. We're going to hear tomorrow from Regent Bradley, and we might have a little more time to spend on some of those other activities. So that would be that'd be one that we suggest. Second thing we talked about is the Regional Education Council. I think right away our committee said, listen, when we look at the economy today, we talk in terms of regions, not just a specific city or a particular, we talk regionally. So why shouldn't we talk regionally about higher education? And it's just not higher education. We thought any type of regional education council should include K through 12, the technical colleges, private, and, of course, the university system. There would be a collaboration to help with such things as, again, advocacy, college readiness, and other things that we hope that the different higher education systems, the K through 12, business community, and others would be able to collaborate on and to work on a regional basis. Finally, we talked about a system-wide advisory council. Now, I think President Riley currently has that ability to do that, but it has not been done in the past. And this, again, we go from local to regional to a statewide system where you'd have representatives from probably each institution coming together to try to compare and work and advise the president of the system on matters involving all of our institutions. So again, it would be a third step going up the level. So those are the three things that we focused on: institutional level boards, regional education councils, and the system-wide, and probably less, quite frankly, the system-wide advisory council. We think it's a different way of doing business than we've done in the past. We think it's consistent with the idea that the increased flexibility, decision-making concept that we've been talking about for the last couple of years. This is just the start of the discussion, but we feel these entities fit in with that mission, the current fiscal political environment. And President Spector, as we said, we don't have any action for you today to suggest, but that is my report, and I'd be glad to call any of and hope that other members of committee would have something to add.
That was a very good summary. Is this on? No. Yeah, got it. Okay. I guess what I would add, we had a very good, frank discussions about ways of doing this, and one of the things we spent a lot of time on was this idea of institution-level advisory council, and use that language more than board, because you can confuse the authorities, or really an institution-level governing board. And I played the devil's advocate of pushing hard as I could for the institutional level governing board, but I went down in the flames that devil's advocates usually do, and we finally made a decision. But what really convinced me that was the good thing to do was until and if we get substantial more authority and the flexibilities of how we manage and lead our institutions, we shouldn't be talking about another governance board, because we could end up with another level of bureaucracy with just the same amount of flexibility, which is not acceptable if we're going to be able to do the kinds of things you heard earlier. So, and the other thing I thought I'd share, because I was real struck yesterday by David Ward and in his observation about the chancellor's role. And he did something that was, I think, exceptionally good. Finally, no, kidding.
Say that when he isn't here.
He did calm me. He's such a sage. He really is. He did a phenomenal job. But he pointed out that chancellors really, you can't use the metaphor of a CEO of a corporation. And he said, at best, we're mayors of a messy city. And I love that. You've heard before that being a chancellor is like herding cats. Actually, faculty and staff don't like that metaphor so well. They don't like to think of themselves as cats necessarily. And over the years, I discovered what faculty, staff, and stakeholders like. So being a chancellor is like being a conductor of an orchestra of soulless. If you could ever get them to play together, the music would be wonderful. Now, since I've gotten older, I think they're more like soulless cats now. But seriously, the biggest responsibility I think a chancellor has, particularly in this day and age, is to try to figure out how to rebuild trust and confidence, cooperation and collaboration between the external stakeholder groups, the price subsidizers, state, federal, donors, and the internal stakeholder groups, the students, the faculty, and the staff. So anything that we do around changing structure and governance that would facilitate the ability of the chancellorship more broadly, the faculty leaders and students and so on, that's how we look at it on our campus, the chancellorship, would be very helpful. So if you look at our report, I think it's suggesting some real substantial change. I don't think it's transformative, radical change. I don't think that's really necessary. But really what drives a lot of the ideas that are in there is how can we enhance the communication amongst and between the stakeholders in the state of Wisconsin, internal and external. And I think that would be especially helpful if we would focus on it that way, so that we can, I'm preaching this over and over again, that we've got to have a better quality educational experience, more high-impact practice on our campuses. That's what's happening. We're not able to do as much of that because of resource constraints. A better quality learning outcomes. Let's admit it, nationally, here in Wisconsin, we're just not doing the job we need to do. Our students need to be even better prepared than they currently are, right? At a better subsidized price, right? As we said earlier, remember, the campus internal stakeholder group are the keepers of the cost. We're responsible in a primary way for the quality of education and the cost of education. In a secondary way, at the price of the education. The state, the federal government, donors and so on, they're more responsible for the subsidized price, and secondarily for the cost. So a better education at a better subsidized price leads to a better price value for a better life for more Americans and Wisconsinites. But it starts with a better quality education, because we can't get our investors to invest more in us or quit cutting us as much as they are if we don't promise that we'll continue to do a better job providing a better quality education. And then the students, foremost, they need to get a better price value. But it's going to take all of us together to do that. And that's what we were talking yesterday. I thought the session we had, Mike, on our task force yesterday was outstanding, because that was the spirit we're starting to develop. So I'm sorry for being so long-winded, but
thank you, Rick.
I think we're at a very good point here.
Anybody else on the committee want to add anything? Mike, go ahead.
As you talk about these boards, or bodies, we had a little discussion about names, and we decided not to go there. But that discussion does need to happen at some point. In some cases, it may sound like duplication. I don't really see it that way. We, as a Board of Regents, are not equipped to promote the goals of individual campuses in a way that they should be promoted. That would be the role that these groups would play. I think it's a very important role. At the meeting yesterday, of course, we keyed into Madison and Milwaukee, and as far as I'm concerned, the sky's the limit on what more they could do with that kind of support. And it ties into flexibilities, it ties into cost, and the way we're all trying to do. So I'm a big supporter of whatever we're going to call these things, and I think they can play a big role at every institutional level of achieving their goals.
Anybody else? Judy.
Rick described himself as the devil's advocate, and in one sense I was also in some of the dialogue. And I want to say that, and on some different issues, I want to say that I do support this where the committee came out. I think that it was a very in a fairly short time, we covered a lot of territory, and there was very good discussion, and I appreciated the other people who took part in that. My issue is probably a small one, but I think it's worth considering, both in terms of today's report and tomorrow's report that will come from the Bradley Committee. And that is the role of the regent. And I think that it needs to be considered as we move ahead. One of the things that was of some concern to me was regents on institutional boards. Who is their leader? What is their role? And whether or not the advocacy, whether the regent becomes an advocate for a particular institution to the Board of Regents, or a communicator. And I don't think that's an easy final description, nor should it be. But I think that it is important to remind ourselves that the responsibility, I think, of each regent is to the UW system, and that anything that can enhance the communication and strengthen the system as well as individuals, institutions is. I'm not opposed to this, and I think it'd be neat to be one of those people. I won't be one of them, but I think having that relationship with individual institutions will be good, as long as we think about how that plays out.
Mike, can I respond to that? I can, whenever you want. We talked about that to some degree. My feeling on it is, if anybody here has a preference for a campus, they have that They have that already, and that's not a bad thing. There's this chancellor in southern Wisconsin who keeps me on a short leash, whether she had a board or didn't have a board. So those relationships are good, and they're there. And I think we all know what our overall responsibilities are. So I don't look at that as an issue whatsoever. In fact, I look at it as an opportunity. If I was to, if for example, Parkside were to form a board, I would recommend to that chancellor with the leash, don't put me on it, get another body, because you always have me on this leash. So I think it's an opportunity to expand relationships, and I think it's a positive thing.
I would say Judy's comments, when I listened at the committee level, raised the consciousness of the committee about the potential problem and drew some good discussion. Anybody else? Chuck?
I wasn't the devil's advocate about much of anything, as I recall, involved in this. Perhaps I was the devil himself. The couple things that I just wanted to just sort of underscore is one, this, and I think Brent articulated it well. This committee, I think, went at this task not with any resistance to change, and I think it's important that even though the recommendations are as articulated, not recommending dramatic change, I think we did take a very hard and serious look at national systems. We looked around the country. We debated, and with the help of many of our committee members, were challenged in terms of asking difficult questions. And I think one of the things that at least I emerged once again out of this process is a pretty deep appreciation that Wisconsin's got a lot of things right, and that this system is a really fairly remarkable system and may in fact be a pretty good model for other states to look to as they pursue sort of the future of higher education in their own states. And I think that all the things that are talked about here were really not sort of a Board of Regents committee or a committee generally that's sort of jealous of power and not wanting to give it up to institutional level governing boards or other people, but really a sort of a group that recognizes a lot of the strengths of the current system. But I think there is also, and this relates to what Rick was saying, and I just wanted to underscore what I think was the committee's belief of the contingent nature of our recommendations on institutional level governing boards, and the connection back to what Brent said about we're all about flexibilities, and that the importance of our willingness to meet folks down the road a piece if there is a decision to relinquish some of those controls from some of our partners in the state, the realization that there may come a time that having institutional level groups, whether they are governing boards or something else, with enhanced authority or responsibility is something that is a conversation that this state could and should engage in, if realities and circumstances change.
Thank you. Jose?
I think that regardless of where we end, whether it's a continuation of the system that we have right now with these local boards or any other configuration, I think we need to be very clear on, from a governing perspective, what is the true authority and accountability, responsibility that each tier has, and that we try as best that we can to avoid instances where the line of separation is very fuzzy, because my worry is both sides are going to think we've got it all, and that's going to become very, very confusing up and down the organization. If at the local board we say, and I'm just fabricating something, you're in charge of the chancellor, you're in charge of the budget, and at the state board level we're also saying you're in charge of the budget, you're in charge of the chancellor, we're both going to claim we are the ultimate power and authority in that situation. So I think we need to be very clear, and I'm not at this point saying whether the local board should or shouldn't. I'm just saying we've got to make sure that if we want to have a system that does not create far more confusion And especially as I would expect that if this does move forward, we're going to invite and want to have, and I would expect the chancellors, they want to have people of means, people of influence, people who see themselves as, if I'm going to give my time and effort and resources, I want to be paid attention to. I'm not here just to listen to you
They should make a difference.
tell me. I want to make a difference. And so I think we need to make sure that we do clarify as best as that we can. The final thing also that I want to say about the Regents possibly serving, I think it's an intriguing idea, but at least my experience in board governance is your first and foremost responsibility is to that organization that you are serving on the board. And I think that we should be expecting, whether I'm on the local board or at the system board, that's where your first and foremost loyalty should be. So I think that if we do move forward in that idea of Regents serving on local boards, I think we really need to think about that, because if I'm going to serve on a board, my first and foremost responsibility is this organization, whether it be at Oshkosh, at Parkside, or wherever, is where I really need to make sure that that organization, among all of them, because I'm on that board, is going to be number one.
Good.
And so we need to keep that in mind also.
I want to finish up with 2 points, if I might, before we go to lunch. And it applies to Bradley's report tomorrow as well as to the Smith report. First is to say thank you to all of those who participated in thinking about all this and coming up with ideas and being devil's advocates or in the majority from the beginning or whatever. I appreciate it very much, and I think it has moved us forward. I also want to point out, though, that a number of very intelligent people have said in one form or another, I don't know what I think until I write, or something to that effect. And I think there's an awful lot to that. I learned it writing briefs, like Jeff and others. It really does help to write it down. And in that regard, I want to especially tell you how much Jane and Jess Lathrop have done to make possible these reports. They really have written them in the hard way. They've done the initial draft, they've done the redrafts, they've had the benefit of the thinking of some of the wisest people around, but nevertheless, they've written a lot. And I think that work deserves real appreciation from all of us. When you finish with us, you can help Regent Calbo, I'm sure.
Thank you.